Hey, this is Luis Monda at the world famous Johnny Toco's boxing gym in Las Vegas, and this is episode 2 of How to Survive in Boxing, the YouTube series. So, as a continuation of episode 1, I was discussing getting preliminary fights if you decide you're going to turn professional and how that works out. In this episode, we're going to cover how the career progresses from there, how we get into bigger fights, and negotiation for higher paying fights, things like that. So when you start out as a preliminary level fighter, particularly if you're a prospect, you're going to have kind of a golden path, like the Wizard of Oz, the Yellow Brick Road kind of thing, because if you have clout in the industry, you're going to have maybe 10 to 15 fights where the opponents are relatively easy. For about the first year or so, you're going to have 4-rounders, depending on how many amateur fights you had and what your experience was. Like if you had over 200 amateur fights, you might go higher rounds earlier in your career. Higher round fights do pay more. So if you have a 4-rounder, let's say you get between 1,000 to 5,000 for that. 6-rounder, you're looking at anywhere like 8,000, so on and so forth. 10-rounders, 12-rounders, until you're on TV or pay-per-view. You'll start out on undercards, maybe dark fights. Everything just keeps progressing and moving up until you see, the really big fights. It also, again, it depends on the region. Like fighters who start out in Mexico, usually they have to have 20 or 30 pro fights before they reach that level. But the thing is, in a place like Mexico, also similar in the Philippines, you can turn pro when you're still a teenager. So you can be 15, 16, 17 years old fighting professionally. That's why a lot of fighters from those countries tend to have a lot more pro fights before they make it higher. Gone are the days where pros used to fight twice a month. I mean, that's doable, but it's really, really, really hard to do in today's market. It doesn't really happen. Now, of course, how you get paid is going to depend on if you win and how you win. I tell people all the time that I knew a guy here who was a pro who moved here from Tennessee. He had 2 pro fights, but he was like a very slick counter-punching boxer. And they matched him with a guy who was also kind of a counter-puncher. So his first 2 fights were very slow-paced, and he won both of them 40 to 36. Then when the trainer contacted the manager again to say, hey, when can we get on another show, the promoter said, yeah, I don't care to see that guy fight ever again. According to him, the guy was boring, so he didn't want to put him on another show. The guy's still undefeated. Like if you look up his record, he's still 2-0, 2 easy decision wins, but he was never offered another chance, at least here locally. So that kind of thing can happen. It depends on how you win, which also depends on how you're matched up. Even guys with a certain amount of clout sometimes get matched up hard right out of the gate. Like you're fighting guys who had amateur experience, who are good at surviving, or are awkward pros. They've been around. They have maybe, their record is something like 10 and 25, but out of their 25 fights, they've never been knocked out, or they've only been knocked out twice by gigantic punchers. So you have that problem. When you're matched hard like that, you can't always knock guys like that out. So you may not have an impressive knockout streak like people want to see. When you see those knockout streaks, like somebody's knocked out X amount of fighters in a row, usually they're manufactured. Like they're put in with guys who, I don't want to say they're soft touches. Some of them are definitely soft touches, but some of them are also guys they know aren't very durable. I tell people about Gary Russell Jr. had a fight here in town against an Armenian fighter who, you look at his record, the guy couldn't punch. This was at the Seminole Hard Rock, not the Seminole Hard Rock, the Las Vegas Hard Rock, I believe. The guy, he only had 6 knockouts in like 28 pro fights, but he had never been knocked out. And Gary actually broke his hand in that fight, so the guy hung around. He's a survivor, and it actually turned out bad for Gary. He had to take time off the sport just because of a not very good match in terms of an opponent like that. The guy was really, really, really tough, hard to get rid of. Things like that can happen, and they can kind of get in your way. As you keep going, though, of course, you get more and more clout and you get better deals. Now, one of the questions that I got from the ShareDog forum is, what happens if you lose? If you lose, boxing is very harsh in terms of, like, people you know in person will forgive your losses, but the fans, not so much. And managers and promoters, some of them do. It depends on how much they know about the sport. Like, they'll look at your record and ask you what happened, or try to ascertain what happened. But it is, right now, the climate in boxing is really hard if you've lost the fight. And it doesn't make sense, because you'll have somebody call a guy who lost a pro fight a bum, and that guy is a Cleveland Browns fan. You know what I'm saying? Like, something like that. Like, they have their favorite pro team doesn't win championships, but if you lose one fight as a boxer, that same guy will call you a bum. That has to do with the fascination of the O. You know, like, so-and-so is undefeated, so-and-so is undefeated, so-and-so has never been beaten. That's kind of always an illusion, and savvy fans know that, but it doesn't make it to the general public, the grassroots level. So fighters tend to get judged a lot more harshly than any other sport. So if you have one loss on your record, yeah, it's going to make it more difficult. You know, that was my life. In the moment I lost my first pro fight, all I got after that were not that good offers. I still wanted to fight again. It just worked out that I ended up training people and found myself better suited for that. But I got a lot of not good offers. You know, I got a lot of offers where it was obvious they wanted me to lose. And of course, being over 30 years old, I considered doing it just to get more fights in. But if you have lost and then you try to rebuild your career, there's way more obstacles you could hit. Because let's say you do win your next fight that you were supposed to lose. Well, now people think you're like some kind of ringer, that maybe that one loss was a fluke, and they don't want to put their fighter in with you because of the risk that you might actually win you're not supposed to. So they have that problem. Or unless they just accept the fact that you're a tough journeyman and the manager of the other fighter realizes that they're just taking a chance and you might kick the guys behind or whatever. If you have a couple of losses, it's even more difficult. You know what I mean? Like, then you become that guy. You become a journeyman. But like I said in episode 1, journeymen make more money in the short run because they can name their price. You know, if you need them to fight, if they need me to fight next Friday, I can basically name my price within reason. You know, like, they'll pay it because they need an opponent for their prospect, and they need an opponent who kind of knows that they're limited going in. You know, they're only going to fight so hard. You know, journeymen fight more often. They tend to be more limited fighters, but every now and again, one of them, you know, Darnell Boone knocks out Adonis Stevenson. You know, Porky Medina knocks out Jalen Love. Stuff like that happens in the sport, although it's not very common. It just depends on the circumstances. But then it may be easier or harder for that person to get another fight. It all depends on what's going on in the area they're trying to fight in. People might want to avoid them. I'll give you a guy that people are avoiding is Yordenis Ugas. Yordenis Ugas has, like, I think 4 or 6 losses, but he fights Thomas Delorme as a replacement for Sean Porter, beats Delorme, and then all of a sudden the high-ups in the welterweight division go, I don't want to lose to this guy. You know, this guy is a roughneck. I don't want to go through that. So that can make it more difficult. Or someone will offer them a big fight and expect them to lose. Nice payday, big fight, expect them to lose. That happened to a guy named Cristobal Cruz, and he ended up winning a world title and holding it for like 4 years. He had 13 losses at the time. That happened to Glenn Johnson, getting offered a fight with Roy Jones Jr. Ended up knocking. That was supposed to be Roy's comeback fight. Glenn ended up knocking him out. He ended up light heavyweight champion and fought everybody at the top of the division. Finished his career really well after it went bad in the beginning. So it is possible. It just all depends on the climate. Again, you know, if, like I said in episode 1, if you have a savvy manager who knows what they're doing and knows how to negotiate deals. You know, as I said in the other video, this business is a lot like music. You know, like, if you have a shitty album, you can rebuild your career, but you better know what you're doing. And you better bring something new to the table that people haven't seen. You know what I'm saying? Like, recapture everybody's imagination. That's what has to be done. Or have a strong fan base, people who want to see you fight a market where you're viable in so that you look attractive either as an opponent or whatever. We also wanted to address the issue of, do you have to make a certain amount of rounds to get paid? No. Once you cross the scale, you're guaranteed your purse. Gone are the days where they have like a winner's purse and a loser's purse. That's kind of negotiated in the contract. Every now and again it still happens, but not very much. I don't think I've ever seen that happen one time, or maybe one time. But what if you just throw in the towel right away or go down? Here's the thing about that. Fight fixing is a federal offense. So if you are implicated in a thrown match, or you raise suspicion that a promoter paid you specifically to lose, that's a federal crime. So the whole thing can be investigated. The promoter's license can get pulled, managers' licenses can get pulled, and you can get banned from the sport. So that does happen, and there's a few YouTube videos where if you look up, like fixed boxing matches or opponents taking dives, that's happened, and there's been a few cases where it's fairly obvious, but I don't think that that's a case of the promoter telling the opponent to do that. I think that that's more a case of a guy who signed a contract to fight pro realizing that they're in over their head and looking for a way out. Because that happens, as well, routinely. I've seen that happen in the amateurs. So that'll be it for this episode. As things go along, we'll get a little bit more into the business of boxing, because it's a never-ending well of things you got to deal with. This business is very complicated. Like I said, it's a lot like music, and nobody knows exactly who's in charge. Our next episode will be coming to you from Mesa, Arizona. I have about 8 amateurs going to the Gene Lewis tournament down there, and we're going to do the next episode from that location. So we'll see you next round.